show me they're there.
Well, let me answer your question first.
Okay.
About the study. For me, nobody ever taught me how to study. I just started reading and
Mhm.
then became, you know how that is. When you first start, then all of a sudden you want to know more. But I never read a book about how to study the Bible or anything. And I even question at this age, am I doing this right? So I think covering the basics is a good place to start.
Yeah. Greg, you want to say anything or?
I'm all ears tonight.
Okay. Well, it's one thing I want to say that, I always try to be cautious how I say this. I'm thankful that I had the opportunity to go study at Lee. It taught me a lot. It also taught me a lot of things I didn't want. But but one of the things I learned there really helped me, and I really couldn't stand this guy while I was studying under him. He made his outline, of all books, verse by verse outline the entire book of Deuteronomy.
Oh, wow.
Then I had to do it with Psalms in another class. But it taught me some things about how to connect one passage of scripture in the Bible to another one without having to go to a concordance. I can't talk tonight. I haven't told my family this yet because I didn't want my wife coming home. I fell getting him on my lawnmower the other day, hit my jaw, and I snapped a tooth off. So I've got to go have some surgery done. So thankfully it doesn't hurt, but it did for a couple of days, but it's kind of affecting my speech because it feels weird in my mouth.
Yep.
Well, anyway, Galatians is pretty simple. Identifying who the author is. It says in verse 1, Paul identifies himself. So it's really no question. And later on, and I think it's chapter 6, we'll get to that when we get there. He kind of identifies himself again. But let me go back in school. I hate to do this, but it's very important. One of the things I've learned about Galatians, and I've studied this book over. Let me just say, first of all, Paul is my favorite writer in the Bible. He really is. I love Peter because I think I'm a whole lot like Peter. I can't shut my big mouth sometimes. And that was Peter. But Paul's writings, I've often told people that if I could pick one book of the Bible, if that's all I could have, I would take the book of Romans. Because in that, it kind of summarizes things of the Old Testament. It gives us a clear gospel. Anyway, just for many reasons, Paul's my favorite. But anyway, the Magna Carta, remember studying in school about the Magna Carta? I wish Daniel's volume was on where he could talk about this. But I think it was 1215, the King of England signed the Magna Carta, which basically said this, and we use it in the United States and any place that has a modern constitution, a constitution that gives the people freedoms. And that's why you'll hear people reference and say it's the Magna Carta. Bible scholars often speak about Galatians. It's the Magna Carta of the Bible, because the book of Galatians, if we took it out, I was thinking a while ago, I'm wearing a polyester shirt. If we were still living under New Testament, I couldn't wear that. If you're wearing a blend of fabrics, you couldn't wear that. If you had your bacon and eggs, I don't know if Greg's still on the low cholesterol thing, but I eat all the bacon I can get my hands on. You're not, okay? Remember a few years ago, we talked about that. Hang on, somebody's trying to chat with me. I didn't have my chat room open. Daniel's want to know if I'm okay because I fell. We'll talk later about that, son. There's so many things like that. If you stop and think about it, we couldn't do because of the Old Testament laws. That's one of the things I get hit with as pastor. I really don't know. Sometimes since it's just us, I just take a few minutes and ask you this question. Do people come up to you and ask you, well, if you really believe in the Bible, why don't you live by the Old Testament law? Anybody ever hit you with that?
No, not well, maybe once in a while, not in a while, but once or so. But I don't know. To me, I don't think that comes up very often. I think it probably does for you because you're a pastor.
Well, that's what I was getting at. I didn't know if it was just a pastor thing that we really get hit with it more. And it seems like as time goes on, the more I get hit with it because people are trying to argue so much against the Bible. Why?
Oh, yeah.
But, if you stop and think about all the laws that were given and we are set free, that's what the book of Galatians, if you could set one word, I'll say two, and then I'm going to zero down to one: liberty and freedom. That's what Galatians is all about. Paul is trying to tell them. Let me kind of back up with talking about the history of it. If you go through the book of Acts, I think it's Acts chapter 14, Paul's first missionary journey. That's when Paul first came to Galatia. Galatia, if you don't know this, is today southern Turkey, which is really kind of interesting. When you think about southern Turkey, we think Muslims and all this kind of stuff. But even today, it is a hodgepodge, very much like the United States is a melting pot, especially back in that time. There was people from all races, cultures there, but predominantly Jews in the church. But there was others there. Well, of course, the Jews kept saying, well, Paul meant well, but we have to bring this back in, and so that's why he's writing this letter. But, if you look at Acts 14, it talks about him being there. Acts chapter 16, I think it is his second missionary journey. He's passed through again. Then on his third journey, and I think I got it somewhere in my notes, I'm not seeing right off the top, 18, Acts chapter 18. So he's been through there 3 times, and it wasn't like he just came in for a week-long revival. Generally, he went in places and stayed for months, if not years. So he has a very intimate knowledge of these people and a relationship with them. And now he's getting word that they're going back to the old ways, the old Jewish customs. And that's why he writes this thing. So we'll keep that in mind as we're going through the study, because it's very important to understand the way he wrote this. I'm not even going to go into a lot of this because it's not that important, but I want you to realize this. Paul talks to him. Well, I can't even remember where the verse is right now. It doesn't matter. We'll get that as we break this down later. He talks about how they received him as a heavenly messenger and how they were so comforting to him. It was in this region where he was at when they took him out and stoned him, tried to kill him, and they nursed him back to health. So, he has a very special relationship with them, and now they're attacking him. Why are you following Paul? That's what people were coming in. Don't follow Paul because he's many of them, even after, if you've studied this in the book of Acts, when Paul had his Damascus Road experience, took some time before they ever accepted him. Many never did. And so there was people going around preaching wherever Paul, it's just like today, whenever somebody goes in and preaches a revival. I don't know if I ever talked to you guys about this, but back in the late 90s, when I went to Germany and planted a church over there, they were very reluctant to let me come into the Church of God was, and for good reason. Dieter Knospe, who was the field director over Eastern Europe, wanted to know why I was coming. And he just pushed and pushed, and weeks of conversations went on. And he said, when the Berlin Wall came down, he said, people came by the hundreds, if not the thousands, brought their TV cameras, went in, preached great crusades. And he said, Church of God people as well, got people saved and left. So then what happened? Here comes the Jehovah Witnesses, the Muslims, because you got a group of people on that east side, the former communist side, who have never heard the gospel before. Now they've heard it. They're spiritually awakened, and we abandon them. That's kind of what was happening here in Galatia. Paul's gone in there. We're going to see this in just a little bit that, well, not today, but next week we'll see that this is where he finds Timothy and brings Timothy along on his journeys and stuff. There was people there really hungry, but as soon as Paul left, here come all the false teachers. And you have the same thing, everywhere you go, that a revival comes in. I used to talk about pastoring churches. I said, I'm not going to have any more revivals, because every time I did, you'd have all these guests that would come in and they would start pulling people away with their false teaching. They would always spring up another church out of every revival I had, and it's like, Daniel could tell he's on there. He's not responding right now, but I probably hadn't had a revival in my church in 6 or 7 years for a good reason. Because especially where I live at now, it is just full of false teachings. I don't want to belabor that. Anyway, why is this book so important? Because if you don't know this, I'm sure you probably do to some extent, what the Jewish teachers were doing. They had accepted Christ, but they were trying to take the Jewish traditions, the Jewish laws, and incorporate it. So it was no longer faith alone. It was faith plus works. And so Paul talks about there in one verse, he said he's so surprised that so quickly after he's left, they've turned away, I find this interesting. Martin Luther, the guy who started the Church Reformation, speaking of Galatians, I want to read this because I want to get it right. He called it my own little epistle. He said, I have betrothed myself to the book of Galatians. Because if you keep going back to it, you won't find yourself getting caught up in all the legalistic nonsense. Right now, I don't know how much you pay attention to. I know you're not on the internet a lot. So you probably don't catch a lot of this stuff. But you've got so much junk going on right now that let me be very careful. I know and appreciate so many people who are Messianic Jews, that they've come out of the Jews and have incorporated Christ in that. But then there's another group that they are trying to, they don't call themselves Messianic Jews. I can't think what they're called now, but they will try to say we're in Christ, but you have to keep the feast. You have to do this. And once you start that, you become a legalistic, can I say it, fool? It's faith plus this, and if we're not careful, I think it's so important that we attend church. But if we're not careful, we can become the same way. If you're not church, you can't be saved. I just had an encounter with somebody last night, 86 years old. She was driving a car, which I couldn't believe. I helped her get her groceries in her car because the woman couldn't even push her. She literally could not get the cart over the door threshold, and I'm thinking, this woman told me she's all alone. She's at home and she doesn't get out much. I asked her about church and she told me, she said, I do the best I can following online. She said, and she told me where she'd gone. Her pastor had died. She had nobody. So I gave her my card and I'm hoping to make a good contact there. But the point is, there are situations people can't go to church, people working jobs or whatever it may be, that, if we're not careful, we can become so legalistic. But I just said this in a message I preached 2 weeks ago, is that if talking to online people, because we only got 12 people sitting in here, but 100 watching online. And I said, if you can't get to church, this is a wonderful tool. And I appreciate having this tool. But if you're relying on this, you got a problem, because the Bible is very clear about assembling ourselves together. So there's a balance in that. But when you start making it a requirement, I don't want to get into that too far. I'll never get done with what I want to talk about tonight. But I worked with a pastor for a little while that published a list of all the tithe payers on the back of the bulletin every week. And I said, that ain't right. You're embarrassing people. And he's, well, they're supposed to be tithing. And I'm like, tithing is something that is, I believe, we're supposed to do. But when you make it a requirement for your faith, you become a Judaizer. And that in a nutshell, that's what was going on. So many different things. So Paul's writing to confront and correct the people there. It's so important.
Can I say something here?
Yeah, go ahead.
To what you're saying, it's a lot like how we were raised, right?
Absolutely.
All of the do's and don'ts. You can't do this and you can't do that. And if you are, then, excuse my language, but you're going to hell.
Yeah.
And what really drove me to go the opposite direction when I left, and thank God he pulled me back in. But it's interesting that you're not interesting, of course it's the word, but I was this morning, I thought, oh, okay, I'm going to take a look in Galatians, and it struck me that grace is what, you're saying freedom and liberty, but that's grace is what
actually
hit me.
On my outline here, the title of it is Grace Alone.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about. It just gave me a warning. I guess because I started early, I learned this. It's going to cut us off in exactly 10 minutes. So, and that's okay. We'll get what we get. But I thought they gave you the preview ahead of time. I'm probably going to look into, this is the free version. You can pay for it and have a lot more time. I want to look into that. I want to try it out a little bit and see how it works first of all.
Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, the one thing is about this, and it bothers me to no end. I've been fighting this with people on Facebook. Again, I told you, we're in such a liberal area, and these people think they're so strong Christians, but we pastored here for 15 years, lived here for going on 18 and a half years now. And I'm telling you, we're in the threshold of babies. And I don't mean that insulting. It just is. They know just enough to get by. And I think that's by and large the church today. You know,
I agree.
It's scary to see things that are going on. And it's like people like, oh, don't judge. And it's like, you need to read your Bible. It does tell you to judge. We as Christians are to judge one another, not judge pointing my finger like we grew up in. But it was like, if I see something going on and I don't correct you, I always use this analogy. If you're driving down the road where I live and I know there's a bridge up there and I don't have a sign out there telling you bridge out, and I don't want to bother you, who loves you more? The guy who's trying to stop you or the guy who just lets you go your own merry way? And since I've lived in this town, Daniel could tell you, I think he's still on there. I don't know if he can even answer to this stuff, but we have lost so many people over the years in the church here because they come in and they said, oh, he's too harsh. And other people say he's teaching the word. People don't want the word. They want, make me feel good. Tell me I'm okay. You're okay. I'm okay. We're all okay. Let's sing Kumbaya. And that is exactly, I believe that's one of the big things about Galatians. We're going to dig into a lot deeper as we get into the study. I'm sorry about my notes just fell. I hate that my notes are to the side. When I got this camera, I have them right in front of me and you won't see them, but I have to keep looking over here. Let me just share this with you before we wrap it up tonight. One of the things about Galatians, it took me a long time to realize this, is that there is a theme. People want to do away with the Old Testament all the time. You can't do that. I mean, we're not bound by the law and stuff like that. But one of the things I started realizing with the book of Galatians is it parallels the Exodus so strongly. And as we look through this, you're going to see Paul making references to the Exodus and coming out and being free. Pardon me. Trying to find this on my notes. I'm getting my thoughts off. The Exodus was designed by God, just like everything else was. The Old Testament sacrifices, God knew that wasn't going to work. It was all pointing towards Christ. Well, the same thing with the Exodus. God took them to the promised land, gave them everything he promised, and they still blew it. It wasn't working. So as we go through this, I want you to see that Paul keeps talking about that he has delivered us. And matter of fact, right off the bat in chapter 1, verse number 4, he talks about that we have been delivered from this present evil age. And he's trying to take us through showing us parallels. And again, it's not binding us to the Old Testament, but remember, most of the church was made up of Jews. So when he's writing this, he's writing to people who, oh, I know what he's talking about. Today, we just totally miss it. And it's not like it's crucial, but I think it's important that we recognize that Paul is constantly showing them God's leading them out, and he's leading them out of all of the bondage. God gave us the law to show us it wouldn't work. We can't earn our salvation. That's what it's all about. And I find this interesting, and because we have a church here in town. When I first moved here, I thought, what kind of name is that? Now, remember, I've been pastoring since 1986 was my first church I pastored, and then we took a few years out for college, but for a long time. This church's name is Church of God, Israel of God New Testament Church. And I thought, what in the world is that? And then one day I'm reading in Galatians chapter 6, and he calls us Israel of God. God, looking at the church today, is saying the church is now Israel. And that's, I used to hear that and I think, I don't believe that. It's clear, it's in the Bible that we are the Israel of God. We are his chosen people. And that's where we get the covenants. That's where we get the promises that are ours, is because what he promised to Israel, it's ours. And that's what he's trying to tell them as we go through Galatians, that you're in jeopardy of forfeiting all this because you're trying to earn your way into heaven rather than trusting in grace alone. I think we got it done with a minute to spare. Any questions?
Well,
No, I'm looking forward to doing this with you. This no expectations, just see where it takes us.
When we I'm not going to give homework assignments for Alpha, but I want you to do something. Read Jeremiah chapter 33, verses 6 through 16. Jeremiah 33, 6 through 16. And especially I want you to zero in on verse 15 and 16. But read that whole passage because it kind of shows, again, the same thing, talking about the Old Testament promises of what is coming. And that's what Paul ties it right back into this again, that we, because of Christ coming from the lineage of David, we are, he says in that passage that Judah will be saved. But notice he says we're saved after the one coming from the lineage of David. Until then, it was a trial and error. Anyway, I'm going to cut it because it's going to cut us off here. Bless you guys. We'll be in touch soon.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.